What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back for another theory crafting video on the archetypes in Ashes of Creation. And today we're going to focus on Tank, my absolute least favorite role to do in any kind of RPG, whether tabletop or digital, MMO, whatever, as well as my least favorite name of any of the classes. We got this team at Intrepid Studios that's coming up with Minstrel, High Sword, Hawkeye, and Night Spell, and Shadow Mantle, and Night Shield, and we get Tank. Like, what the... So, I really would love that switch to Guardian. Anyway, I've never been a big Tank fan. I think it's too much fucking responsibility. That's a shitty reason, but I've just never liked it, right? Never been something I've enjoyed. So, I might struggle a little bit here and there because while I do love making characters and I do love the roleplay aspect, the theory crafting aspect, especially for a game like Ashes of Creation that doesn't even exist, it's real though, so says my copium dealer, is that it's a lot of fun, but Tanks are not my favorite. So, let's jump into it. So, where Tank intersects with Bard, you get Argent. At first, I had no idea, so I did a little research. So, Argent was often used, Argent means like a silver liquid metal, almost white, silver. It comes from a Latin name that means white, or that means silver. So, it was often used in medieval times as a way to engrave onto like coats of arms or fabric or, sorry, my elbow's like popping, or really fancy books or something like that. And it like shown through as a silvery kind of white gold silvery kind of look to it and would use to embroider or enhance artworks oftentimes than most like coat of arms. So thinking about that, thinking about what a bard is, and I'm sitting here trying to get through it, I came up with an idea that I really enjoyed, which was an Argent really leaning into a bard, right, buffing like a support class, and then like a herald, like, you know, now entering the room, the Duke of Nottingham! Robin Hood reference, I don't know why that came to my mind. You know, they've got the big horn, or whatever, but it's a tank, so that seems less tanky. So then what I thought is the coat of arms part is what if a minstrel could embroider, I know that that's fabric, but engrave their armor or their shields with quote-unquote coat of arms to enhance their abilities. Or they could display them like a bannerman of some sort, display coat of arms or something to that effect, you know, ability-wise, that then provides like an AoE buff to their entire party. And then being a tank, you know, it would be a buff to maybe like resistance to magical damage or certain physical damages, or given just armor or health or something like that. So I think that would be a really cool way to play into a bard, the support role of a bard, and then coat of arms and everything, embracing the name Argent and what it was actually used for IRL. Oh, I can't stand that when I use gaming terms or like shorthand in real life. I'm pretty sure I started it ironically, and now it's a part of who I am, and I don't like it. Save me. So, IRL, what it was used for in history. So I think taking all those things and kind of coming up with what an Argent could be is it ended up coming together into a really cool idea that I think could actually perform well in game. Now, we do know, right off the bat, before we continue, there are three types of tanks. There is a control tank, so let's assume crowd control or battlefield control in some sense. There is a shield tank, which makes me think of a traditional tank. And then there is a evasion tank. So, Argent, right off the bat, shield tank. Yeah, you know, I'm thinking that coat of arms on the shield. I'm thinking up front, you know, blocking, even if they're like dropping a banner or some sort of that system, dropping that down, and then they're wielding. It would be really cool if they wielded a spear and a shield. I don't even know if, I know there are spearmen that shield like Phalanx version, but I'm just, you know, I'm sorry, that just came up, like wielding the banner. That would be cool. Anyway, a one-handed weapon and a shield being a shield tank, and then using that coat of arms system or some kind of mechanic that's coat of arms or engraving or embroidering their uniforms, their armor and weapons to buff themselves. Something like that could be a really cool way to play all of that shit together to make Argent, while kind of embracing a tank, embracing a bard, and giving some identity to the archetype, which you know that I'm worried about. Alright, so then we go to Paladin. Tank meets Cleric. First, we know that Cleric can provide life or death augment. Now, how that will translate to a tank, it could be self-buffing, it could be self-healing, it could be debuffing of the enemy, it could be like maybe gaining life if it's the death augment through dealing damage. So you're still self-healing, but it's more of a, I have to do damage to heal, draining life, and then the life one, again, like I said, buffing or healing. However, I think Paladin is one of those ones on this giant table of 64 that's going to be difficult for Intrepid Studios to kind of have creative freedom with, simply because we all know what we think a Paladin is, right? Like, I can theory craft so much about Argent, or Spell Shield, or Knight Shield, or a Keeper, like a Trapper Keeper. Sorry. So, I can only theorize, or I can theorize my fucking nuts off with all that, right? However, when it comes to Paladin, there's a box already created by everything I've consumed in my life that has to do in that fantasy world through books or shows or cartoons, movies, through D&D, like tabletop, other tabletop, what am I trying to say, systems, video games. Like, I have a good idea what a Paladin is / should be. So, Paladin for Intrepid Studios, I think, is going to be one of the more difficult ones, where they have a box that they want to stay in because you want to feel like you're playing a Paladin, and I'm sure those same people who are designing Intrepid have played those Paladins because we know they're avid gamers. Are they going to have to stay in the box, or will they be able to add a little creative freedom here and there in order to make a unique Paladin to Ashes of Creation? I don't know. I think it'll be difficult to an extent, and like I said, there's a couple of them on here, like Paladin and Necromancer and Shaman. I think there was one more, but I can't quite remember. Warlock. Things that we have preconceived notions of, preconceived ideas of what it should be or what it could be. So I really do think that that's going to be a difficult one. I'm not going to waste too much time on it because, again, like I said, it's less of let's theory craft what a Paladin is and more like let's sit back and see what Intrepid does with a Paladin. Okay, so next we've got Tank and Fighter. So we know Fighter is going to be a lot of like gap closing, maneuverability. So I think this way, I think you could call a Knight a control tank. Argent and Paladin, I'm kind of stuck on them both being shield tanks. Fighter, I think, could be a control tank. Not necessarily a crowd control tank in the sense of like stuns and freezes and disarms and things like that, but more of a battlefield control tank, using maneuvers, flanking, things like that, things of like a tactical tank. How that would translate to gameplay, a more offensive-minded, less defensive-minded, so still able to tank because they are a tank primary, but they got a lot more gap closers, a lot more, let's say, charges or ways to draw people in. More, instead of approach with my shield, defensive stance, come at me, aggro, and more like I build my aggro through doing damage, and that's how they build their aggro, and then they use, like I said, tactics, focusing on positioning and what am I trying to say? Focusing on positioning and damage more, and controlling the battlefield by like funneling people into situations, maybe able to deny certain zones or draw more groups to one area. I'm not entirely sure. Using the Knight aesthetic, then again, they could throw down like a gauntlet, like a one-on-one battle. Maybe there's like a chivalry kind of deal. Where they can build up honor, quote unquote, to use more powerful knight abilities to kind of lean into that. They could have fun with like white knight, black knight, like these sayings and things that we think about when we think of knights. I think could be neat, having like a charging, like a mounted situation. Like maybe they build up a chivalry bar, and once it gets to a certain point, they can mount onto their knightly mount. And now their abilities have a longer range, they draw more aggro, things like that, because now they're mounted. When I think of a knight, I think of the one-on-one combat, but I think of jousting, and I think of knights on horses, and I know that's not necessarily how they always did battle in real battle. There was mounted combat, but most of the knight combat that you see in history books and everything is on foot, one-on-one. But I think it would be neat in this fantasy world for the knight to build up a chivalry bar, let's say through taking damage or dealing damage, and the fact that we're saying fighter, tank, knight is a little more offensive. Building up their chivalry bar through taking some damage to dealing damage, and once it gets to a apex, they're able to then get on their mount or their knightly steed. You hear that, Shrek? She called me a steed. She called me a noble stallion. Is it noble stallion? Steed? Man, it's been so long since I watched Shrek. But I think that would be a cool way to do it. And then also just thinking of a knight being a control tank, like especially if I'm on a mount, I can kind of run around and maybe like herd enemies in and like really control positioning of not just my allies, but less my allies and more the mobs or the PvP, the enemies. You know, if I can do a lot of damage with a charge and we're fighting, okay, well, the DPS is on this side, we're having a hard time getting to them, and I get on my steed after building up a chivalry bar, and then I, let's say, charge or pounce? I charge or joust this way, right? Or whatever the fuck. And they want to get out of the way, so they jump to this way. While I might not have done a lot of damage, what I did do was create, you know, I repositioned them closer to where we wanted them. Maybe it creates a terrain that slows them more, so crossing my now trampled path or whatever it is now more difficult for them, so try to herd them over here. You know, playing them more as a control, like a battlefield tactical control tank could be neat. When ultimately I feel like it'll just fall into shield tank. I would like to see a battlefield control tank, and I really like the idea of some kind of chivalry bar or resource that you could build up and then jump onto a steed or a mount and get some cooler shit to do. I think that would be a neat way to do it, and I like it. So then we go to tank and mage, which is a spell shield. Now I will tell you that in certain tabletops or certain games on the internet, tank mage is always a fun thing that people want to try. Not sure why, but there's some fascination with like the muscle mage, things like that, and it could be really fun. Now we know mage is an augment, so let's start with the base mechanics. We know mage is an augment is going to offer you fire, ice, lightning, and teleportation. Fire, ice, lightning, and teleportation. Those are your elemental augments, right? Pardon me, I really need a drink, and I don't know where to put my water. The elemental augments. So right off the bat, you know, being cool to like light your shield on fire or give it an electrical charge so that when people hit it, maybe they get a chance to be paralyzed or stunned. Fire to obviously apply a dot or maybe slow their movement. You know, making like a fire field slows their movement, maybe adds a little cooldown to some of their abilities. Teleportation for gap closing, grabbing those mobs that are running away, repositioning in an instant, things like that. I think that could be a really cool way. Now thematically or like class archetype specifically, you know, how could we make it a little more fun than that? And I think the elemental shields or armor could be neat, or just applying, like we've done a lot of the time we apply mage, applying some kind of really neat elemental oomph to the tank abilities. You know, I don't think it'll be too crazy and too flashy, but I think like imbuing your shield with the elements or your weapon could be like could be the easiest way to do it, as well as just making them very magic resistant, like a great tank archetype to take into like a magic damage heavy mob, or even if it's PvP into like a magic damage heavy comp, raid boss, having like elemental resistances. Being able to buff their teammates against magical damage or elemental damage could be a really neat way to do it as well, because now you have a tank who's a little more specialized. You know, all of a sudden you're like, yeah, we have a paladin tank who does great. We're having a little trouble with this dungeon though. Oh, it's a dragon. You know what? That paladin tank, maybe he needs to be a secondary tank. Let's go get a spell shield and let him be the primary tank, because he's going to take, 10% less damage from all the fire. And this effect won't work on him as well, and blah, 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 and it'll make it easier to heal him. And now you've created a need for that specific niche of a tank, so it could be neat. And then applying some of those cool arcane, like I said, to the shield and the weapon would allow it to have a little more, I think, PvP utility, or just utility in general. Being able to maybe make fire fields or ice fields, or static charged fields, static electricity charged fields, or teleporting around suddenly gives, I don't want to say immobile, but most times tanks aren't the most immobile. They have like a engage, 1 or 2 engages, and that's about it. But having the teleportation to become like pretty damn mobile, and then that battlefield control of dropping like these little AoE segments in order to control it, I think would be cool. Another way would be maybe they're more of less of a battlefield control and more of like an actual crowd control, with lightning with paralysis, ice with frozen, Fire could create impassable terrain or hard to pass terrain, and then teleporting, positioning themselves around the battlefield, in order to be in more control. So I'm thinking crowd control, tank-wise, would probably be where Spell Shield with land. And I think there's a lot of cool things they could do with it. I'm trying to tone down my, they need a new resource pool, and they need this really fucking cool mechanic. Because realistically speaking, I would like this game to come out before I retire. So having an archetype that has some cool things to it is awesome. And some archetype identity is great. However, some of these I've overreached a little bit, which I'm probably totally going to keep doing because it's fun. But, I'm trying to keep my expectations in reality, which is hard to do when Intrepid has all these fucking crazy-ass reveals one after the other, right? All right, so then we go to Tank meets Ranger. Now, this one's interesting. It makes a Warden. This one's interesting for me because you don't primarily see, a range damage dealer in heavy armor. When I first think of it, I think I've thought about, plate armor with a musket. If I brought it to modern day, I think of it like riot cop with a shotgun. So how does that translate to our fantasy world? And it doesn't. So this one I was at a loss for. You try to think nature with Ranger. You don't have to try to think it. I think nature with Ranger. So it makes me think maybe they could call a tank pet, but then, like I said before, it feels like Summoner's really the one they want to focus on summoning or calling pets. So that makes me think, okay, what if a Warden was just with the Ranger archetype? Maybe they get favored enemy bonuses. Maybe they get a lot of Ranger utility, which they most likely will. Maybe they get anti-range damage, they're really good against range damage, or maybe they're really good against a lot of little mobs. Maybe they are a tank and they can tank, but they are just really good at tanking large groups, or I guess holding aggro on multiple targets, which can be an issue. And we've seen this in other games. Some tanks are really good at holding the boss, taking those big hits, surviving them, holding aggro on the boss, things like that. And some are better at holding AoE, and where they might necessarily AoE mobs, where they're not necessarily good at taking the one massive hit, but they're good at taking a lot of damage over time, spread out in a bunch of little hits. Maybe that's where the Warden falls. And the reason I think that is I think Rangers in the woods, hordes of smaller beasts or packs of beasts or pack hunting. Maybe they can use that kind of idea, like pack hunting and what have you, hunting in the woods, to bring some sort of pack hunting dynamic to their party. If it is a Ranger and it is range damage, I don't think that just being a Ranger automatically makes your tank need a bow, but we do know Ranger can augment the effective range of abilities. So now maybe, whatever attacks they have, whether it's a ground pound or a weapon throw or a shield throw, can happen at a longer range, which is kind of neat and different for a tank. So I'd be interested to see where they take this one. Right off the bat, your tank's just going to be able to engage from farther away. It's going to be able to pull aggro from further away. Perhaps they get access to some sort of traps. But that doesn't really scream Warden to me. While it does scream Ranger, it doesn't scream Warden. Now, I will say, it makes me think of a prison warden, just saying the name Warden 600 times while I'm trying to explain this. So it's kind of cool because with Ranger, I've also talked about a bounty hunter-esque. So maybe it's less, if you go tank and kind of go with that bounty hunter play for a Ranger, now you're talking about crowd control with shackles, or, putting bounties on enemies would be the mechanic. But when the bounty's on there, other teammates do more damage to them. Maybe the whole party does more damage to it when they attack, or something like that. This one was really hard to theorize, just because it's just so hard for me to think of, just with the name Warden and then it being a Ranger and a tank. I just really had a hard time figuring it out. So I'm going to need a little help from you guys down in the comments, okay? All right, so after that, we go to Night Shield. Now, this is cool because this is the first one that I think I can say will be an evasion tank, which is always a really cool way to do a tank. A tank that mitigates a lot of damage by just not fucking getting hit. So I think that's really cool. As for the name Night Shield, I do think they're evasion, and they will most likely use a shield. However, what if it's less of I use a shield empowered with the power of night, and more like Night Shield, like I use the night or stealth or darkness or whatever as my shield. So being an evasion tank, kind of drawing aggro through mass amounts of like dots, whether it be bleed or poison, keeping their aggro through damage, and then using evasion, high dexterity, if you will, and shadows to their advantage to like move around the field or draw aggro to themselves. And if they envelop themselves in shadows, it's like, okay, you enveloped yourself in shadow, you do less damage, but now there's a higher evasion rate. And if you do get hit once or twice, then you take reduced damage and then your shadow goes away. And now you're just an evasion tank. Okay, well, I bring my quote-unquote night shield back, right? And now I have my shadow, and it can take 2 hits and increases my evasion rate. And, play like that, like where they have a thing, like a shadow, or a night shield, like a shadow that maybe takes the shape of a shield that floats in front of them, or something like that. And then you just play into this evasion situation. So it could be a lot of fun, and I do think it's cool to have a tank bringing some rogue utility. I think there's a discussion to how much utility as a secondary class those high utility classes like Ranger, Rogue bring to a primary class. That's a totally different video. However, I think having rogue utility on top of your tank, who's an evasion tank, like that seems like a lot of fun. It seems like a really cool and different way to play a tank called Tank. Oh, the name kills me. So I think that could be a lot of fun. I like the idea of it. Yeah, I just like it. I think it could be neat. All right, so then we're going to go to Keeper. Now, for this one, I did have the idea of summoning shields, like having multiple shields around you, 2 or 3 shields that kind of float around you, and they can block maybe they can fly out and block for a target ally, or maybe they just float around you giving you benefits. Like if you have this shield summoned, it helps you block physical damage. If you have this shield summoned, it can block magical damage. If you have this shield, it's for range damage, or it does CC, or they can summon these shields, and then maybe their abilities deploy the shields. So like if as a tank I have a shield wall, but I have my magical damage shield summoned and it's floating around me, I use my shield wall, my magical damage shield modifies my shield wall, so now it's a magical damage shield wall. Vice versa, maybe there's a shield that's like thorns, like from Druid from D2, and I can apply that to my shield wall. See what I'm saying? Like, so I'm summoning these shields that are floating around me, providing some different utility, but then whichever shield I have summoned at the time augments my original tank ability. So I'm still a tank, I'm still using my primary 100%, but now the summoner makes it look a little different with the shields floating around. Gives me a little different utility, makes me a little more Swiss Army knife as a tank. So it could be neat, and then you have some summoner abilities. Maybe they let you summon the tank pet. I don't know if you'll have access to all the different types of pets as a summoner secondary, but it would be neat if I got to summon a tank pet of some sort, a turtle or some shit, to help me block or draw aggro, or just enhance myself. Yeah, so I think that would be cool, and I really like the idea of the summoning shields, and they're floating around you, and they augment your abilities. It seems like a neat way. It seems like a cool aesthetic. If you were out fighting one, it seems like a cool play style. So I really like it. And then tank action. It's called a World War. Dun, dun, dun. Guardian. So this is actually what I think the whole class should be called, is Guardian. But, I mean, let's be real. We're talking the tankiest of tanks. The shield wall itself, the heaviest of armors. Maybe they get reduction to the weight of armors, or if there's negatives for heavy armor, maybe they go away when you're a Guardian. Maybe not that. Maybe you just get extra benefits from shields and from armor, and maybe you alter the block mechanic in a way where you take less damage when you block, or your stamina for blocking goes down less, or you have abilities that reset your stamina bar, if that's what we're going to go for blocking. I've gone into blocking on a couple different videos. If you guys want it, I'll make a short video about my thoughts on it. But, things like that. Guardian gives you the sense of them protecting everybody, so maybe they can like jump to an ally or take damage for an ally, or they put a buff on an ally that when that ally takes damage, they take damage according to the Guardian's armor or the Guardian's endurance or whatever it is. So if I put it on my mage, you attack my mage, he's got 10 armor, but because he's got my buff on, when you attack him, it's like he has the 100 armor that I have. So that could be a really cool way to do Guardian, taking damage for people, drawing aggro, obviously, throwing their shield, maybe growing in size, being just an immovable object. And, you know, I mean, that's it. That's just a classic tank. Like tank on tank. Guardian could be really, really hardy. And you're just like traditional, stereotypical almost tank that you see in shows and movies and games and everything. So yeah, I think that's it for the tank archetypes. Of my favorite, obviously, I really liked Bard. I like the Argent. I like the idea we came up with Summoner. Night Shield seems cool. Spell Shield seems cool. But when it comes to like Paladin, never really been my bag. Fighter, unless they could like come up with that chivalry idea, I might give it a try or something to that effect. But those with Guardian and even Warden, it's still not my cup of tea, man. Not what I'm digging, right? But I think we came up with some cool stuff. It took some research on a couple of these. I had to re-record this a couple times because my thoughts weren't quite straight, so I hope they came across better in this one. Guys, I really appreciate you watching another Archetype video. If you're still here, like and subscribe. So long, and tanks for all the fish.